If a man ignores you, the first thing that usually crosses your mind is to wonder what you did wrong. Did you say something inappropriate? Did his interest change suddenly? But what if I told you that his indifference has more to do with his own insecurities than with any mistake you think you made? Carl Jung claimed that what we project onto others is often a reflection of our own fears and inner wounds. So if a man chooses to distance himself and avoid you, what is he really expressing with his silence? Is it coldness, disinterest, or simply a mask to hide what he doesn't want to face or admit to you or even to himself? The truth is, just like women, the male mind is also full of shadows, hidden corners where their greatest fears hide. Carl Jung called this the shadow, that aspect of our personality we try to deny or repress. When a man ignores you, it's not always about disinterest. Often, without realizing it, he is reflecting his own insecurities, his fear of attachment, or even a sense of inferiority that he prefers to avoid at all costs. His apparent indifference may actually be the clearest sign of an internal battle he doesn't even know how to handle. Now, why do some men act this way? Is it a matter of pride, emotional coldness, or simply a deep fear of showing vulnerability? It's easy to think their silence is a sign of strength, but the truth could be exactly the opposite. Carl Jung said that until we make conscious what is in our unconscious, it will continue to control our lives, and we will call that fate. So, does this man who ignores you really have control, or is he a prisoner of his own inner conflicts? Here is where many women make the most common mistake. They see his indifference as a challenge they must overcome. They try to get his attention, prove their worth, or decode the enigma of his behavior. But according to Carl Jung, true power is not in chasing what seems unattainable, but in learning from each experience and strengthening our own essence. Instead of obsessing over what his silence means, what if you began asking yourself what he is trying to teach you about yourself? Think about it. What if his greatest weakness isn't his apparent detachment, but his inability to handle what he truly feels for you? In this video, we'll explore what it really means when a man ignores you and how this attitude, far from being a sign of superiority, can become the key to regaining your power. He distances himself because he's certain that no matter what happens, you will always be there. He believes he can come and go as he pleases, confident that your interest in him won't change. But what happens when that certainty disappears? What happens when you suddenly are no longer that predictable woman he took for granted? Carl Jung said, the greatest illusion of human beings is believing they can control what they don't understand, and this applies perfectly to relationships. A man only feels the absence of someone when he realizes the stability he had has been replaced by uncertainty. His skill isn't in walking away, but in his conviction that you will never leave. But when you decide to stop reacting, stop waiting, and stop showing unwavering interest, everything changes. You stop being a passive piece in his story and become an enigma, a mystery he can no longer easily solve. This is when his mind enters into conflict because, as Carl Jung said, what humans fear the most is what they cannot predict. Not knowing for sure what will happen with you causes a doubt that eats away at him more than the loss itself. Many women fall into the trap of trying to regain the attention of a man who ignores them. They post indirect messages, check if he has seen their texts, look for excuses to appear on his radar. But paradoxically, all of this only reinforces his sense of control. What really changes the game is understanding that your absence has more impact than any desperate attempt to be noticed. When he starts noticing that you no longer write to him, that you don't react to his posts, that you no longer make an effort to get his attention, a void opens in his mind. The woman he thought he knew is no longer there. And this is the first great weakness of a man who ignores a woman. He only feels in control as long as he thinks she is still available. When that belief breaks, he enters a state of uncertainty that can lead him to question things he never imagined. What if he lost something valuable? What if you're no longer part of his world as before? Carl Jung said that everything we reject in others is a reflection of what we reject in ourselves. That's why many times a man distances himself not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't want to face the impact you have on him. But what if one day he realized he lost that? Now, let's go deeper. Would you like to know the 5 most sensitive points of a man who distances himself and ignores you? Those triggers that, when touched, can make even the proudest reconsider their attitudes. So stay with me, because what comes next could completely change how you see this game. When you decide to disappear from his life, when you stop reacting to his indifference, something unexpected happens. He begins to feel a discomfort that didn't exist before. Suddenly, the presence he took for granted is gone, and without realizing it, he receives a small dose of his own medicine. The silence that once served him to feel in control now turns against him. Carl Jung said the human psyche always seeks balance, and when one extreme disappears, the other intensifies. If before he felt secure ignoring you, now the void of your absence begins to weigh heavily. This is where the signals begin. Suddenly, you notice he looked at your stories, reacted to a post, left a subtle comment as if he wanted to remind you he's still there. But the difference is that now he no longer has the certainty that you'll also be there. That effortless attention he used to receive becomes his greatest weakness. Carl Jung teaches us that the human mind hates uncertainty, and when something constant disappears, the brain enters a state of alert. This is the second great weakness of a man who ignores you, the security of believing you'll always be there. And when that security breaks, his inner world begins to shake, and this is just the beginning. Do you want to discover what other sensitive points can make a man who ignores you react in a way he himself didn't expect? Then keep watching, because what's coming next could completely change how you understand his behavior and how you position yourself in this story. One reason a man feels comfortable ignoring you is that, in his mind, he believes he has absolute control of the situation. If he perceives you depend emotionally on his attention, fear losing him, or think you'll never find someone better, his confidence is reinforced and his indifference becomes a power strategy. But what happens when that dynamic changes? When a woman stops projecting a scarcity energy and instead begins to radiate security and abundance, something in that man's mind becomes unbalanced. Carl Jung claimed that what we resist persists, and in relationships, the same happens. The more you chase someone, the more they pull away. But when you distance yourself and put yourself at the center of your own life, the situation transforms completely. Because when he feels that the influence he had over you begins to fade, when he notices his absence no longer affects you the same way, something changes inside him. A feeling appears that wasn't there before: uncertainty. And this is the key point. The game truly reverses when you strengthen your self-esteem, when you stop settling for crumbs of attention, and above all, when you understand you don't need to prove anything to anyone. The woman who knows herself, who knows her worth, does not chase, does not beg, and does not exhaust herself trying to be seen. She simply becomes irresistible because she projects a magnetic energy that does not depend on external validation. When you reach this level of personal security, you not only regain your power but weaken his. Because suddenly, he no longer has the certainty that he can ignore you and come back whenever he wants without consequences. Now, he is the one who starts to question, what if she's no longer there when I decide to return? Before moving to the next weak point of a man who ignores you, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt a man ignored you because he knew he could do it without it changing anything? If this content is helping you, like it right now, and tell me in the comments where you are watching this video from. Don't leave yet, because at the end of this video, I'll explain exactly how to make a man who distances himself learn to value you and even fear losing you. So keep with me, because now we're going to discover another weak point that can completely change this game. When a man distances himself and ignores you, he does it with the arrogance of someone who believes he is the center of your universe. He feels unique, special, indispensable for your happiness. And you know why? Because many women unknowingly feed that illusion. They lock themselves into the relationship, invest all their energy in him, and in the process forget there are other areas of their life that also deserve attention. Carl Jung said that whatever we focus our energy on grows. So if all your attention is on a man who ignores you, the only thing you're doing is reinforcing the sense of control he believes he has over you. But what if he suddenly realized he's no longer the only focus of your attention? The third weak point of a man who ignores you is precisely the illusion of exclusivity he believes he has. And to break this cycle, you need to weaken that feeling of superiority that keeps him in his comfort zone. The best way to do that? Reconnect with yourself and with the people who truly add to your life, your friends, your family, the activities that you're passionate about. Maybe without realizing it, you drifted away from those connections because you were too focused on him. But when you decide to prioritize yourself again, something powerful happens. Your world expands, your energy changes, and he starts to realize he isn't and never was the only pillar of your happiness. And here's something important. This is not about finding another man to replace him. You don't need to fill a void with someone else. The key is to rediscover yourself, to open up to new experiences, to surround yourself with people who make you feel valuable and whole. And what happens to him in this process? The feeling of being irreplaceable begins to crumble. Carl Jung said that humans fear losing control over what they believe to possess. And when a man realizes you are no longer the same woman who waited patiently, he starts feeling exactly what made you feel before: uncertainty. This is a hard blow for him to assimilate. But there's more. Because when we reach this point, the rules of the game change completely. In the next few minutes, I'll reveal how to use this to your advantage so that instead of you being the one waiting, he starts to doubt and question if he can really keep ignoring you without consequences. So stay with me, because what's coming could make you see the whole situation with new eyes. One of the greatest weak points of a man who ignores you is his unconscious need to feel indispensable to you. There are men who convince themselves that a woman needs them emotionally, financially, or even for security in her life, and this belief gives them a false sense of control. But what happens when you show him that your life doesn't depend on his presence, that you don't need him, but consciously choose who you allow by your side? At that moment, the dynamic changes. You are no longer the needy woman he could ignore without consequences. Now you're an independent woman who doesn't require anyone to feel complete and only accepts in her life those who truly add value. And this can destabilize him because it means that if he wants to keep being part of your world, he'll have to prove he has something valuable to offer. No longer is it enough for him to show up occasionally or give intermittent signs of interest. Now the burden is on him, and here the game changes completely. He can keep ignoring you if he wants, but what once worked in his favor now begins to turn against him. Because while you evolve, grow, and become stronger and more secure, he realizes something he never considered. He no longer has the same power over you. And then a truth emerges that he cannot ignore. You are not the one losing him, it's him losing you. Before moving to the last piece of advice, the one that will show you exactly how to make a man who distances himself not only learn to value you but even fear losing you, I want to ask you, have you ever noticed this pattern in a relationship? If this video is helping you see things more clearly, like it right now and tell me in the comments. Because what comes next could completely transform the way you face this situation. So stay with me, because now we'll discover the last piece of this puzzle. A man's self-esteem is one of his most sensitive points and, at the same time, one of his greatest weaknesses. When he decides to distance himself and ignore you, he's operating from a position of apparent confidence. But this is where a firm idea Carl Jung defended comes into play. A person's identity is built from the projections and reflections they receive from others. What does this mean? When a man feels admired, desired, and valued by a woman, he receives a boost of self-esteem that reinforces his ego. It's like an invisible fuel that gives him the sensation of control over the situation. But what happens when that source of validation is cut off? When suddenly he no longer feels that unconditional admiration from you, when the attention he used to receive disappears without warning, something inside him begins to weaken. Because the great truth is that most men don't realize the impact of a woman's presence until she emotionally distances herself. It's not necessary to ignore him physically or enter unnecessary games. True change happens when you stop treating him as someone special, when you stop glorifying his presence in your life, when suddenly he is no longer the center of your attention. And this affects his psyche in a way he can't even explain with words. Carl Jung said the human unconscious acts symbolically, and when a man perceives that the woman who glorified him no longer looks at him the same way, no longer gives him the same importance, something inside him destabilizes. He doesn't fully understand it, but he feels it. And here's the key. This is one of the most powerful weak points of a man. He's used to being desired and admired without needing to do anything to deserve it. But the moment that validation disappears, what was once only a source of comfort becomes a lack, a void he doesn't know how to fill. And it is precisely at that moment you must be one step ahead. Instead of begging for attention or trying to prove your worth, simply withdraw that energy from him and redirect it toward yourself. You become the woman who doesn't need his approval to feel complete. And right at that moment, he begins to see what he's really losing. But there's more. In the next few minutes, I will show you how to completely transform this dynamic so that instead of you questioning your value, he starts wondering if he can really keep ignoring you without consequences. Because what comes next is the last key that will make it so that instead of you waiting for him, he starts feeling the need to win you back. So stay with me, because this last part can make a difference in how you see this situation and even more in how he starts seeing you. When a woman fully realizes her own worth and understands that her well-being does not depend on the presence or approval of a man, a fundamental change happens in the relationship's dynamics. The one who once felt secure ignoring her, confident she would always be there no matter how he treated her, begins to experience a feeling he hadn't considered before: uncertainty. When he perceives that the attention and affection he used to receive unconditionally and effortlessly are no longer available, his security crumbles, forcing him to reconsider many things he once took for granted. One of the most determining factors to create this impact on a man's mind has nothing to do with manipulation tactics or superficial strategies of artificial indifference. It's about applying a much more powerful principle, the principle of reciprocity. Carl Jung stated that relationships are mirrors that reflect back what we give. However, if in that reflection there is an imbalance where only one offers admiration, desire, and attention while the other simply receives without feeling the need to reciprocate, the scales tip in favor of the one who makes less effort. This is exactly what happens when a woman gives everything without making sure she receives the same in return. The moment a man gets used to receiving without having to make any effort to deserve it, the attention and affection she gives him lose value in his eyes. He begins to perceive her presence as something guaranteed, as if it were a right rather than a privilege that requires care and reciprocity. This is why so many women end up feeling exhausted and frustrated in their relationships. They give themselves completely, hoping that one day the man will open his eyes and realize everything he has received, returning that love with the same intensity. However, the reality is that recognition does not come when it is passively expected, but when an internal change is generated that modifies the power dynamics within the relationship. This is the change you need to make right now. A woman who truly understands her worth never gives everything away for free, nor without making sure there is balance. She knows that for a relationship to be healthy and meaningful, there must be reciprocity, and that self-love is the foundation of any solid bond. When a woman adopts this mindset, the dynamic changes completely. The man who once ignored her and felt free to distance himself whenever he wanted, without fear of losing her, now faces a completely different reality. Suddenly, he can no longer take for granted that she will always be there, ready to accept any crumb of his attention. And at this point, his security begins to crumble, and he starts questioning if he really has control of the situation. If you have ever felt you gave more in a relationship than you received, tell me in the comments. And if this content is helping you see things more clearly, like it right now. Because what comes next could make you see this situation from a completely different perspective. True change happens when you understand that the way a man treats you is a direct reflection of how he perceives his own value in your life. If he feels he can walk away, ignore you, and come back whenever he pleases without consequences, he will never feel the need to make an effort or fear losing you. Carl Jung explained that unconsciously, humans tend to test others' limits to see how far they can go without facing repercussions. And this happens in relationships more often than you imagine. Many men, without even realizing it, adopt behavior patterns where they choose to distance themselves, show indifference, and play with a woman's emotional uncertainty, knowing that no matter what they do, she will remain available to them. But what would happen if that certainty suddenly disappeared? When a woman decides to stop giving free validation and breaks the predictability of her behavior, the impact on that man's psyche is much deeper than he can understand. He had gotten used to the idea that his presence was enough to receive attention and admiration without any effort. However, the moment that attention is no longer guaranteed, he begins to experience an emotion he hadn't associated with you before: insecurity. Carl Jung said the human mind is designed to seek patterns and stability because it gives us a sense of control over our reality. But when someone who was always available suddenly changes their attitude, the brain goes into alert mode. And it is at this precise moment that the game changes direction. The man who once ignored you now feels he no longer has absolute control. He is forced to reconsider whether he can keep acting the same way without consequences. Because for the first time in a long time, he is the one who starts to feel he might lose something valuable. Here lies the difference between a woman who is valued and one who is ignored. The first knows her attention is a privilege, not an obligation. She doesn't chase, she doesn't beg, and above all, she doesn't accept less than she deserves. And when a man perceives that there's a real possibility of losing her, his desire for control transforms into a need to be accepted again. But the most important thing in all of this is that at this point, the woman who once waited is now waiting for nothing. She has become a woman who no longer needs to be chosen because she understands she always had the power to choose who she allows in her life. That is the mindset shift that finally makes a man understand a woman's true value. And this is only the beginning of something much deeper. One of the biggest mistakes a woman can make in a relationship is to cling to the hope that someday a man will open his eyes and finally recognize her true worth. However, what many don't realize is that no one can see in them what they haven't first learned to recognize themselves. Carl Jung stated that everything we accept in others is a reflection of what we have accepted within ourselves. If you constantly settle for less than you truly deserve and keep investing time, energy, and love in someone who doesn't show the same level of commitment, the message you're sending your own mind is that maybe you're not valuable enough to receive something better. This belief, even if not always conscious, ends up shaping the way you allow others to treat you. When you cling to a relationship where there's no reciprocity and justify indifference with the hope that one day that person will change, what you're really doing is building the idea that your self-love depends on external validation. But the reality is that the only person who can change this situation is you. Now imagine for a moment what happens when you stop living according to that expectation and start knowing yourself from a place of complete security and emotional self-sufficiency. Think about the impact it can have on a man's mind when from one day to the next he notices the woman who once idealized him and eagerly awaited his attention now seems completely free from his influence. At that moment, the security he had vanishes, and for the first time, he begins to question whether he really made a mistake taking your presence for granted. When a man feels he has lost control over the situation, an emotion he hadn't considered before arises: fear. It's not just the fear of losing you as a person, but the unsettling feeling of realizing he's no longer a fundamental part of your life, that he's ceased to be relevant, and that his absence no longer has the effect on you that he expected. This loss of influence can be devastating to his ego because until then he had trusted that no matter what he did, you would always be there for him. Here is where the power dynamic changes completely. The question is no longer whether he will come back, but whether you really want to be with someone who only realizes your worth when faced with the possibility of losing you. Before going deeper into this, I want you to take a moment to reflect and ask yourself, have you ever been in a similar situation? Have you noticed you gave too much in a relationship without receiving the same in return? It's important to understand that this isn't about bad luck or always finding the wrong person, but about how you yourself have allowed this dynamic to repeat. Carl Jung said that what we don't face within ourselves, we inevitably project outside. If you find yourself trapped in a pattern where you constantly attract people who don't value you or make you feel invisible, maybe it's time to ask yourself why you keep investing more in others than in yourself. If you spend more time worrying about what he feels, wants, or thinks without stopping to ask yourself what you really need, then it's likely you have been putting your self-esteem in someone else's hands. And this, more than anything else, is what really needs to change. The biggest mistake a woman can make is thinking she needs to prove her worth to someone who, if he really wanted her in his life, would see it without the need for constant tests or sacrifices. If a man believes he can ignore you without consequences, he will never feel the need to make an effort for you. And if he's convinced he can walk away and come back whenever he wants, without needing to do anything to deserve your attention, he will never fear losing you. You are the one who teaches him how to treat you. You are the one who sets the limits of what you accept and what you don't. If until now you haven't been valued as you truly deserve, maybe it's time for a deep change in how you perceive yourself and in what you decide to allow in your life. Because at the end of the day, this situation has never really been about him. It's about you, the image you have of your own worth, and the way you position yourself in your relationships. Carl Jung said that everything we attract in our life is a reflection of what we carry inside. If you constantly find yourself with people who don't prioritize you, who ignore you, or who seem not to see all you're capable of offering, instead of asking what's wrong with them, start asking yourself when you began to believe you needed to fight for someone's attention to be seen. A woman who truly knows her own worth never exhausts herself trying to be recognized. She doesn't need to prove anything because her mere presence is enough to attract those who truly deserve to be in her life. And here is where everything makes sense. The man who ignores you today may seem confident, but deep down, he is also afraid. Afraid of losing the control he thought he had over you. Afraid of no longer being the center of your world. And above all, afraid of realizing that maybe he wasted the attention of an incredible woman who has now simply decided to move on. If you take everything you've learned here and apply it in your life, if you work on strengthening your self-esteem, if you learn to be emotionally independent, and promise yourself that you will never again accept less than you truly deserve, he will feel that change in a way he cannot ignore. And at that moment, he will only have two options: either genuinely and sincerely learn to value you, or finally understand that he never had as much power over you as he imagined. But before you wonder whether he will react or not, there is an even more important question you should ask yourself. Do you really want to be with someone who only realizes your worth when he feels he might lose you? Wouldn't it be much better to be with someone who chooses you from the beginning without games, without tests or conditions, simply because he knows you are extraordinary and never needs to doubt it? The truth is, a woman who has options never despairs over a man who distances himself. She doesn't seek to convince anyone to choose her because she knows her worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation. In her world, love is not something begged for or negotiated, but something that flows naturally. If you have to try too hard to get someone to see you, maybe it's time to stop trying and start seeing yourself with the eyes you always wanted others to see you with. The real lesson behind everything you've learned here today isn't only about making a man feel your absence. It's much deeper than that. It's about becoming a woman who will never again beg for attention from anyone, who will never again feel the need to wait for a message, a sign, or any kind of external validation to feel complete. It's time to leave behind the mentality of settling for crumbs of affection and start living with the absolute certainty that self-love is the foundation on which everything truly worthwhile is built. Because the moment you decide to change the way you see yourself, the whole world begins to respond to that renewed energy. And the most ironic thing about all this is that the very same man who once thought he could ignore you without consequences suddenly finds himself trapped in a completely unexpected situation. The desperate need to recover what he lost without realizing it. But here is where you must ask yourself the most important question of all. Do you really want to stay in the same place, waiting for a man to finally realize your worth someday? Or would you rather take a step forward and become that woman who will never again have to worry about it because she already knows with absolute certainty who she is and what she deserves? That answer is up to you. Because at the end of the day, what really makes you powerful is not the reaction you generate in others, but the way you see yourself. And when you truly internalize this truth, when you manage to feel deep inside your being that you should never have settled for less than your worth, that's when the real change happens. From that moment on, you will no longer accept half-hearted relationships, endless waiting, or empty promises. Simply because you will no longer be available for anything that isn't worthy of your own self-love. If this video has opened your mind and made you see things from a completely different perspective, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because this is not just a video to reflect on, it's the beginning of a path of deep transformation. You deserve much more than just a moment of clarity. You deserve support, information, and tools to help you build the life you truly want. and here we are to walk that path together. And of course, if this content has been useful to you, like it right now. Not only does it help me keep creating material that truly makes a difference, but it also allows other women who need to hear this message to know they're not alone. If you've ever experienced a situation like this, if you ever felt you were giving too much without receiving the same in return, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. Let's talk about it, because simply putting into words what you've experienced can be the first step toward changing it. And finally, I want to remind you of something you may have forgotten. The power has always been in your hands. You just needed to realize it. So now, stop waiting, stop doubting, and stop asking for what should have always been yours by right. Hold your head high, walk confidently, and live the life you truly deserve. No excuses, no fears, and no looking back.